Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Summer Reactor series on containers. I'm Kerry Chai, and I'm a PM on the Azure Container Apps team. For today's workshop, I'll be joined by Sophia Carpenter, who is my coworker on the ACA PM team. And I want to give a big shout out to Joshua and Paul as well from the Cloud Advocacy team, who put together the previous iteration of this workshop, and without whom this workshop today wouldn't be possible. This is a 3-week workshop series, of which this is the first week, and Josh and Paul will also be running weeks 2 and 3 as well. So you can sign up for that in the link below. Now, today we'll be going over what are Azure Container Apps, some use cases, the structure of a container app to be aware of, a quick overview of some features, and then head into the workshop of deploying your first container app that Sophia will present. So with that, let's dive right in. Azure Container Apps is a high productivity option for developers who are moving towards serverless containers, and is one of the easiest places to host your containerized applications. In particular, the service is tailor-made for those evolving towards more microservice solutions. The service adopts open source standards and APIs in order to provide app portability while adopting community best practices and patterns established in open source technologies such as Dapper, Kata, and Envoy. In addition, Azure Container Apps allows you to focus on app code that is most important to you, while we take care of the infrastructure. So you can bring any of your Linux containers with no programming model required, and this means we'll run them for you. And having an unopinionated language model means that you can deploy your existing code to Azure Container Apps without having to refactor it. All the meanwhile, we reduce the amount of infrastructure that you need to maintain for things like ingress and scaling. Finally, at its core, Azure Container Apps is a serverless product. That means we automatically handle dynamic scaling based on your workloads. By using declarative scale rules, we eliminate the need for you to handle complex infrastructure. For example, if you need more compute during the week and less on the weekends, your apps will automatically scale in and out to meet that demand, even down to 0. And the beauty of all of this is that you pay only for what you use. So open source, the ability to focus on app code, automatic serverless scaling, that's great and all. But what are the kinds of apps that you can actually build on Azure Container Apps? The great thing is that it's a container-based workload, which means anything that you can containerize in Linux, we can run for you. And we have a number of tools and features available to you to provide a high productivity development experience. To name off a few, for microservices overall, we provide optional managed Dapper support by exposing a simplified Dapper API, automatic versioning, and seamless upgrades. Although some microservice components are more specialized. For example, when creating public HTTP app components in your microservice architecture, we'll support traffic splitting between revisions for blue-green deployments. For web apps, we support all the essentials from custom domains to TLS certificates. And Kata and jobs really enable those event-driven processing and background processing scenarios. So now we've taken a high-level overview of Azure Container Apps and the scenarios you can run. So let's take a look at what the actual structure of a container app and the components there are to keep in mind. To start off with, whenever you go into Azure Container Apps, there is going to be this environment. And this environment serves as an isolated boundary for your collection of container apps. So all of your different container apps within the same environment will share the same virtual network that you set, as well as write logs to the same logging destination. Now, I mentioned this, but you can also have multiple applications within the same environment. And this is particularly great for microservice scenarios where you might want to have multiple apps and services all communicating with one another. We have a lot of inbuilt tools, such as Dapper, which we previously mentioned, which make this app-to-app communication really seamless. In addition, we also have revisions. Revisions is a bit more of an advanced concept. So if you don't remember about environments, apps, and revisions is the one to forget. But revisions is really great if you have scenarios that really require version tracking and deployments. So what you can do is you can have multiple different revisions for your application, and each one of these can be a separate deployment of your application. So you can look back at the history of the deployments that you have for your app. Next up, we have replicas. And replicas are really great because they're the unit of scale that we have for Azure Container Apps. So every single container app that you have, the number of instances is going to be the replica count. So as you're scaling in and out, the number of replicas that you have for your container app is going to be changing, increasing and decreasing. And finally, we also have containers. So containers are the sort of configuration for which your containers are running in Azure Container Apps. And these provide a lot of flexibility options for you in terms of having isolated amount of CPU and memory that you can provide to each of your container apps. So for example, let's say I have my container app, let's say I have 3 of them within my environment. But for a single container app, I want to have a few different containers running that might have a few different compute sizes. So one maybe has 1 gigabyte of memory that it needs, while another might have 2. You can run those all within the same application. So now we've taken a look at the structure of your container apps, but how do we deploy our applications? So in Azure Container Apps, we support all the standard mechanisms for deployment that you would come to expect, right? So if you've been using Azure tools for a while, you might be familiar with the CLI, AZD, with Bicep, or VS Code and Visual Studio. So we support all of those, and we have seamless integrations with all of those. In addition, we also have additional capabilities that we have direct integration with. So things like GitHub Actions for Azure Container Apps allow seamless integration in order to deploy your containers directly from your GitHub repository. In addition, we also have a number of observability capabilities built right into container apps to make it really easy for you to understand what is going on with your application and really observe your application as it scales, runs, as you deploy new revisions and new versions of your application. And all of this, all the monitoring capabilities happen at the environment level. So it's aggregated into one easy place for you to go and observe what is going on with all of your applications within the environment. One really cool feature that is available within the observability suite that we have is log streaming. So log streaming provides near real-time capabilities for monitoring and observing what is going on within your applications. So this is a tool that I actually really like to use in order to see what is going on as I'm making changes within my application. And it's something that I think later on during the workshop, I don't think we explicitly ask you to go through log streaming, but if you want and you're curious, you have a bit of time, it might be worth just poking around at this and seeing like what capabilities it provides. Next up, I mentioned before that we automatically handle scaling for you in Azure Container Apps. And this can be done by setting up rules for HTTP or event-driven and CPU or memory rules with Kata. This is super easy to configure. So this is all done at the application level. And next up, we also support a number of ingress features for you inside of container apps. So what's really great about Azure Container Apps is we simplify a lot of the management experience and the overhead that you need for managing that infrastructure. So in this case, for ingress, we have a lot of built-in tools to make this simpler. And for ingress, you have a number of options that are available to you in terms of what you can do, in terms of how you expose your application. So for example, here, you can choose to have your container apps be either internal or external. And what this means is that when you create your container application, you can choose to either have it created with a public endpoint or without. If you choose to have it be without the public endpoint, then it's not going to be able to be exposed to the public internet. But if you do, then you can be accessed from wherever. In addition, we support both HTTP and TCP traffic, and we also support a number of cool features. For example, here, one that we provided on screen is traffic splitting. And what you do with traffic splitting is that, let's say you have a few different versions of your application. So maybe revision 1, revision 2, and let's say you're doing a blue-green deployment and you want to see how you can do like A/B testing between the different versions and see how one compares with the other. What you can really easily do with traffic splitting and revisions is configure it so 80% of your traffic goes to one revision, while 20% goes to the second one. So those are just some of the really cool features we support for ingress for your container apps, and there's many more. Finally, one topic that I'm going to touch briefly on, just because it is covered within the workshop itself, is secrets. So we support adding secrets to Container App, and secrets securely store sensitive configuration values that you might have in your application, and they can be referenced as environment variables at the app level. So this means every container app can have their own secrets, but multiple revisions within the same app can all reference the same secrets as well. So that's something that you're going to see, and you're going to work with within this workshop that Sophia will be presenting. So with that, that's a quick overview of some of the concepts that there are in Azure Container Apps. Why would you want to use container apps and the different scenarios that we support, as well as features. And with that, we're going to hand it off to Sophia. And she's going to present on the workshop for deploying your first container apps. And hopefully you guys will be able to walk through some of these steps with her, or afterwards watching the recording and be able to go through.
Awesome. Thank you, Gary. It's always cool to see all of the stuff that we're doing in container apps. But yeah, I'm Sophia. I am another PM with container apps, and we're going to walk through a demo. The way to access this is through a link called aca.ms/deploying to ACA. I think that there's going to be a little banner pop up. Okay, this one. So yeah, you can follow along and see all of the steps that we're going to go through. And I'm just going to walk through. I don't have any like pre-baked stuff. We're going to go through it live and go through all of the steps together. So in this workshop, we're just going to be making a simple container app. We're going to practice container apps from a local development space. So right now, I don't have anything in my computer. You guys don't have anything in computer. Why don't we look through the process of what we're going to do? So there is a repository that has our container app content up in GitHub that Josh has been making. And what we are going to do is, first off, we're going to get a local copy onto our computer so that we have a local development space. Then we're going to set up our Azure resources. We'll have them all be empty and stuff, but get it all set up so that we can add our content up to a container registry. This will be the space where the containers are held, and then you can in the cloud, and then you can add them to your app, and then we'll make our app. And it's going to be a very simple web app and everything, but it'll show the process. Afterwards, we might play around with some settings, play around with some secrets and such. But let's get started and get this app going. Some prerequisites. I'm not going to go through all the steps for these prerequisites, but you do need to have an Azure account. You can get a free account through this link on the site. Download the Azure CLI or install the Azure CLI along with Docker and Git. That'll be really helpful. If you don't have any of these downloaded or installed, I would pause the video and do that yourself. I'm going to go forward since I've got it all set up already. So first thing is we got to set up our local development space. I have a terminal up. The instructions support either a Bash or a PowerShell language. We're going to be using the Azure CLI commands, not really the PowerShell commandlets. So most of the commands are really, really similar. But in the more complicated steps, you'll see the you can choose your Bash or your PowerShell commands. But first things first, I like to make a file, folder for all my stuff. So I'm going to make a little directory. And now if I list all of my folders in my little terminal right here, we have a folder called the Reactor Summer 2023. And I'm going to move my directory, or move into this directory. And so now I've got a nice little contained space on my local computer. It's got nothing in it. If I lift, it's empty. And in there, we can clone our repo. So I am literally just doing a copy paste of all this stuff. So this is a repo that Josh has set up that has our container and some content in there. So let's clone this. And now it's in there. So if I list my items in my terminal, there is deploying to ACA. So let's CD into that. And list what we have. And now there's a lot of content in here. Why don't we open it up in Visual Studio? I'm just going to open it up to show. This is the command to open up the Visual Studio in this directory. And it's taking a second. There we go. Let me pull it onto my screen. And this is all of the content that you just downloaded into the repo. So there's some documentation, some just pictures and images that we've been using, and then the static. So this is where we have our little web app. There's the CSS is our styling, and our HTML is the content that we'll have on our site. It's a nice little thing in there. There's also some other files such as a Docker file and a Go file. This is going to help deploy your container app up to the container registry. But cool. So with that, we can start taking our next steps. So make sure that you've changed into the repository, do the CD deploying to ACA, because we want to be in this space when we are deploying our local content up to the cloud. Alrighty, next up is some housekeeping. And Carrie and Josh, feel free to interrupt with any questions if you want to bring up people that are commenting in the stream. The next up is our little housekeeping. We need to make sure that you have the extension container app. Oh, nope, I didn't fully copy, so I've now have a double repo. Let's actually look at that because that was a mistake. If I do that, there is deploying to ACA in there. That's the double repo. Here, if I open up the file again in VS Code, I think that'll be the quickest way. There it is. Ooh, Josh, you have a good little command. Thank you. I always forget the commands for removing your file. So this is a remove the deploying to ACA. And now if I list my content, that's gone away. So there's always has to be little mistakes in there. But anyway, there is your AZ extension. We add that. I already have the extension, but you can always run the command and it just says like, oh, hey, if you already have it installed, it's already installed. And we have explored the file. So now we have our local development space set up. We have the content in our computer, everything set up. we have our space in our folder of where we're keeping stuff organized. But we don't have the cloud organized. So let's set up our Azure resources. First thing for folks to do is to log into the Azure CLI. That's AZ login. I'm already logged in, so I'm not gonna run that. And then we'll make a resource group. So a resource group is a space that organizes all of your Azure content, all of your Azure resources, and it groups together your resources. So first things first is to make a name for them. This is a default name. I already have a resource group called my resource group name, so I'm going to call it my summer resource group. The nice thing about setting up your variables is that you can change them, but then still be able to copy paste all of the commands if the commands use the variables. So you don't have to, my variables and your variables can have different content in them, but we can all use the same command. So I just set up my resource group name and my location, and now let's create a resource group. I love that the CLI always gives the warning, and it's always so concerned that it wants me to know that I'm copy pasting stuff that has multiple lines, but I promise it's okay, bud. Cool. So this is our resource group. We set it up. It was really quick to do. It's in North Central US. There's not much information in resource groups. Next up, we need to make an empty container registry. So like I said, the registry is where you can kind of save your containers or instances of your containers, and that's where the content is held within the cloud. And then we'll use that registry as a reference in our app when we're making our container app, so that then we can deploy the app. So this is a way. Right now we are going to make our container registry name. The first step is just to make sure that it's a unique name. So let's make a random number. And actually, I want to know what number it is. So echo random. Let's see what number I got. 16312. So everybody do their own random number. And then we can make the variable for our name. ACR name, our Azure Container Registry name. And so this should be my registry 16312. I'm always a little bit paranoid that like something I did is ever wrong. And so I like having the to echo commands out just in case. So yeah, that's the name of my registry. And let's create this registry. So this one takes a little bit longer to make because they're setting everything up. And yeah, Josh and Carrie, if you want to join, feel free. I like having people to talk to as well. So yeah, now we have the registry. So this is the information about our container registry. It's a lot of random information that, or it's not random, but it's useful information. You can see that the public resource group is is my summer resource group, and we have our registry. So when we were talking about the content, I just want to think about the steps that we're at. Right now, we have most of the Azure content. We just need to make the environment. And hey, Josh, how's it going?
Hey, good.
Awesome. Thanks for hanging out with me while we do this.
Of course. Yeah, it makes it a little bit more fun to just be
Definitely.
by yourself. Absolutely. So one
Yeah.
thing that I wanted to just
Mhm.
kind of touch on as we're going through here. So we've got the repository, we've created a resource group,
Uh-huh.
and now what we've created the ACR instance, I think is where you left off. Is that right? The container registry.
Yes.
And so
So
that well, go ahead.
yeah, we've got our local source of information, and then in the cloud, we have our resource group set up, our registry, and we're about to set up the environment.
Okay. Have you built yet the image itself and pushed it?
No, we haven't.
Okay.
We're nothing from our local computer has gone up to the cloud. That's a really great question to clarify.
Okay, yeah, and just I can add a little bit of context there. So when you're working with containerized applications, if you're not familiar, there's some kind of set of instructions that you write that tells the image or tells Docker how to build the image. And so that's the
Mhm.
Docker file that's inside that repo. And what's in there, really, if anybody's wondering, is a really, really simple Go web application. And so there's a number of files that it uses HTML and CSS, excuse me, and that file is just instructing how to build the image. And so if you were to just open up the Docker file, this will give people an idea of the very simple application that's being used to demonstrate this, because the value here is not necessarily what my app is, but that if you can have it in a Docker file, you can deploy it to ACA. And so here you can see it's super simple. It's grabbing the Go Alpine, it's setting the working directory, moving a bunch of files into it, and then using the Go build command to build the binary that will start the web server and then host that web application. And so here is just using the standard library in Go to be able to create that application. Now, what you're getting to now that you have the container registry, that is so that the container apps has somewhere to get this from. Because if we were to build this locally, it can't pull from our private network up unless we
Mhm.
give ourselves a public IP, which we don't want to do. And so the
Yeah.
registry is like a file share for all the container images that Container Apps is going to pull from. And so that just gives more context of the architecture that's sitting behind.
Yeah, and that's really helpful context because I personally haven't done too much with understanding Docker files and Go files and such. And the kind of the nice thing about one of these tutorials is that we're kind of giving it to you guys so that you can then play around with it and apply it to other items and to apply it to your own projects and such. So you don't need to be entirely an expert. And also you can see that it's pretty straightforward and pretty simple.
Mhm.
Cool. Let's before we do the upload to the container registry, let's add our um, content. Let's add our environment. So just the final environment. This is there we go. So we've made our registry. Oh, and we also want to log into our registry. Don't forget this step. Uh, it's like just a quick little one so that your computer is logged in.
Well, it gets confusing because, well, I'm already logged into Azure CLI. What is this other login? And well,
Mhm.
this is the CLI command that wraps the Docker login command. And so it's registering Docker login. So that way it has the ability to reach to the registry. So it's giving a username and password through the Azure CLI to be able to log you into that instance so you can pull images and so forth.
Definitely. So now we've got an empty registry instance set up, and let's make our next little Azure piece, which is the environment. Um, Again, this is just making the name for our environment. Oh, no, oh, Control V. And then, here, actually, let me go back to my split screen. And just to check, is my screen pretty visible for everybody? I realize I forgot to ask that.
It looks good on my end, but maybe we can get a thumbs up in the chat. And
Coolio.
yep, got a few thumbs up.
Awesome.
A quick question from the
Mhm.
audience here. Mike says, can you have more than one app in an environment?
Yes, absolutely. That is a great question. So let me create the environment with my simple copy paste. So the environment is your space to, like Carrie was saying, it's kind of a boundary line around your apps. So in microservice setups, if you want to have a bunch of containers apps talking to each other, then you can put them all in one environment. They can contact each other, talk to each other. It's similar to if you had, say, a front end app and then a back end app, or something of that sort of setup.
Another analogy
And
might be, if you're familiar with Kubernetes, would be a namespace where they can all kind of talk, and there isn't any networking that needs to be additional networking that needs to be put in place for them to communicate.
definitely, yeah. And in this demo, we're only making one app. It's just one little app within our environment, but it's a very useful space to when you have multiple apps to do it within an environment and structure it that way. Cool. So now we have our environment. And one thing that I want to point out was this little code that popped by. It said no log analytics workspace provided, generating a log analytics workspace. So this is a really cool thing where the environment, when we were creating it, Azure noticed, oh hey, you don't have a log analytics, and that's how you monitor and keep an eye on a lot of your data stuff within your environment. I think Carrie mentioned it in the presentation before. So it just automatically sets this up. We're trying to be really helpful within container apps of, hey, you want to set up your environment, let's also set up your other resources for you.
Is that where, so I don't, maybe we can touch on it a little bit
Yeah.
later, but there is that, so this is all running in Azure, and so you can't just connect to the container that's running locally or what have you. And so there are little panels in the portal that, like console, I believe is what it's called, or console log.
Hmm.
Is that workspace where all that data is being put then? The actual logs of the container, is it being put in that analytic workspace, or?
Yeah, let's actually, this was the next step that I wanted to do, of let's take a pause and look at what is in our space. So there is, I want to say that the, oh, so if you go to azure.com, like the portal.azure.com, I have to make sure that the custom portal is false, but that's just because there's plenty of like preview stuff that we want to check when we're creating container apps, and so want to make sure that that's not on right now. So let me look at my resource groups, and I've got a bunch of different resource groups. I should probably clean this up at some point in time, but do we remember the name of my resource group? It was Reactor Summer, or my summer resource group. There we go. So this is my summer resource group. It has these different items. It's got my environment in there, which has nothing much yet because we don't have our app. We have, but we can look around in that. We have the registry, which also doesn't have anything in it, but it's where we'll store the image. It'll be the file space for our images. And we've got the log analytics content that will help us connect to data sources, monitor solutions. I don't think that we'll get into it too much unless we have time or a lot of folks have questions on it. But this is something that we've just made, even though I didn't write in the command specifically to make a log analytics workspace. It created it for us so that it's an easier setup.
And that same thing will happen when you create it through the portal. So you created it
Mhm.
through the Azure CLI and the command line, and it created it for you. That same thing will happen when you do it through the portal. So it's not anything that, in either scenario, that you'll need to worry about
Mhm.
spinning up manually.
Cool. Alrighty. So we have everything set up here. Now our next step is to take the content that we have in our local computer and upload it to the container registry. And this is where the Docker files and the Go files come in. So I might ask you some questions, Josh. Alrighty. So first step is let's make a couple more variables. This is going to be the name of our image, the tag. So the way that you reference items in your registry is through an image and a tag, and that combo of image and tag is what's how the registry knows which content it should be sharing. So you can have multiple apps or multiple instances of your container in your container registry, and keeping track of the image tag helps you make sure that you are connecting the container that you want.
Well, so and then there's one other additional piece, which is the repository. And so that ACA name.acr.io would make up the fully qualified name of the registry and the image. And then what you'll see later on in the revisions is the tag is what you can use to key off to switch between different versions of it. And so that'll allow you to have multiple versions stored in the ACR by using different tags. Yep.
All right. So now let me copy this over so we can kind of see it in our whole page. We're doing ACR, Azure Container Registry build. And so we want the registry to be named our Azure Container Registry that we made. We want the image to be this server / image name / tag. And then that little period is the showing that the content we want in our the directory that we're in currently. So if I press this, I'm in the Summer Reactor 2023 deploying to ACA. It's taking the content that I have in my file and opening it up and uploading all of this stuff.
Yeah, it's a nice little helper or wrapper around a couple of Docker commands. And so it's building the Docker file. And so that dot at the very, very end is just the relative path of the current directory. And then that'll make it look for something called Docker file. And so if there's any file in that repository or in your current working directory or the relative path, it'll start to build it. And then it also pushes it up to the registry. So instead of running the two Docker commands, you can get away with just one AZCLI command.
Yeah. So this takes a minute because it's taking all of the content from my local computer and putting it up in the cloud. So it just goes for a little while. And then we will have content in our registry, all of our resources set up and prepped, and then we will be able to make our app. Ooh, now it's retrying. So there's times where it just has a little pause and hasn't gotten its feedback yet. So it just retries and then pushes. And we have our content.
Should we take a look at that in the registry just to see, what that would look like? Yeah.
So if I'm in, this is again my summer resource group. This is all of my Azure resources. And let's go to my registry. And there's an overview. This is the login server, like we said, the server when it was created. I want to say,
I think repositories. Yep.
Yeah. And we have our little web app. This was the tag that we had. This is the info. And so, yeah, we have the content up in Azure. It's not,
Do you mind going back to repositories real quick? We can just talk about how they're stored. So it kind of gets a little confusing because it seems, we've got the container registry, and then it contains one or multiple repositories. And so the repositories are just whatever image it is. So each image itself gets its own repository. And then in that repository, when you click into it, like you did, Sophia, just a minute ago, you get to see all the tags or the versions of the container image that are hosted in Azure on ACR.
Yeah. So there we go. Now, let's go and make our app. Let's do it. So clicking the next on our site. So there are two things that we need in our container app. We want the name of our container app. So it's just going to be called My Container App. And then our password. So our password is, let's actually break this down because I want to talk through this a little bit. If I say ACR show,
Well, to add a
ACR,
little, do you mind if I add a little bit of context right before we dive in?
sure, go ahead.
So the context is that to be able to create the app, the ACA needs to be able to talk to container apps, needs to be able to talk to the container registry. And so with this command, there are parameters in there that require passing in some form of authentication between the two services. And so what we're doing here is getting the password. I think the username is the registry. We're getting a password for the current person that's logged in. So whoever's logged in with the Azure CLI. So that's just the reason behind the password is it's going to need to have some way to authenticate to the registry to get the images. And so this is one way to do it. There's several other authentication mechanisms or options rather for setting up the communication. But yeah, I just want to give that context. But yeah, take it away.
Yeah. So this is in terms of like, we want to create our container app. There's lots of different, there's a couple different components that we need. So what we want to call it, what resource group we want it to live in, the environment that the Azure container environment that we want the app to live in, what image do we want, and that's dependent on our registry, and then the way that we have a connection with our registry is through the registry username and the registry password. So the way that you get your registry password, I'm going to show you the credentials to my Azure Container Registry for this registry. And it gives you these little passwords and stuff. Like, they're passwords, please don't share them, but it's okay. This is something that I'll probably be deleting the resource of in the next day or two. So we have our value right here. So that's where, if I take the next little bit of this, we have query password 0 value. So that is filtering. So we're taking the ACR name, we're specifying the output. That's like if you want it to be in YAML or in JSON. This one's TSV, which I'm not actually sure what that stands for. And then we are querying for the password value, password, then the 0th item in the password, and then the content of the value. So with any luck, we should be getting this as our password. It takes a second because it has to go through. And see, there we go. It returns that. So then this is something that I don't think too many folks will actually need to do, but I have it in the instructions. There's this little pipe thing that it's a little bit weird. It's only in Bash and it's not in PowerShell. And this is because when I was going through the instructions in my Bash setup, I kept having this really random error saying that the when my secret, when I was making the container app, the secret was having a non-standard not variable, letter, character. That's the word. And it was saying like your password has to have just a alphanumeric and with maybe a dash and something else. And I was looking through, I was like, there's nothing there. It was because I am using Windows, and on a Windows computer, I'm using Bash. I think I'm actually using a Windows version of the Azure CLI, which I need to update at some point in time. That's like my own issue. There is a stinking carriage return at the end of this item. So it was causing all of these errors. That's why I've got this little pipe. This is a bash instruction where you can, it just is trimming any -r. It's trimming and deleting your -r, which is the carriage return. There's actually, Scott Hanselman wrote up a whole little thing about carriage returns. If you look up Scott Hanselman and carriage returns, I internshipped with him before I started as a full-time employee, and this was something that we talked about and such. But there's all sorts of interesting history behind the carriage return and the issues around it, and how sometimes it's just this little thing that can create some big bugs.
Well, also what was funny is when we found it, right, which is last
Mm-hmm.
night before the stream today, which is always
Yeah.
happens to be the case, and then it just turns out to be a
Mm-hmm.
hidden character return. So
Mm-hmm. So let's do this whole item, and feel free to try out when you're doing this, to see if you remove your this little chunk from the password, if when you create your container app it works. If you're getting a weird error, and then you can try putting that back in. And again, if you're using PowerShell, it has none of these problems. So, or at least the setups that we have seen don't have these problems.
well, it's tricky because it will happen. I believe it will happen when you're on a Windows machine, but you're using WSL or you're using some kind of Bash terminal,
Mhm,
because it's from the operating system. So if you're on a Mac and you're using Bash, you're not going to run into it, which is why I didn't run into it the
mhm,
first time because I was using my Mac at the time.
yeah.
So that'll be interesting.
There's so many different compilations of how folks have their computers set up, and how they, like, if you're on Mac, if you're using Bash versus PowerShell, if you have what Linux version, what um com- just all of these things. And as you get more into it, it's like everybody has a very unique flavor. I always find it cool. Okay, so I have my password, and actually let's echo out that password, and it's there. And actually, if you want to test it out, you can echo out like with something on either side of the password. Uh, I'm just having equal signs on either side, and you can see the equal signs are there on either side. So there's no carriage return or enters or weird blank spaces. So hooray. Okay, and now let's make our container app. Yes, I accept the paste anyway, and let's go. So this is going through, adding a registry password to connect to your registry. That's why you need to have your registry login and password. Um, it's setting that connection up and running, and it takes a minute or two. I forget the exact timing that at these days it's taking. It gets quicker all the time. But cool. Are there any questions in the stream from folks? I haven't been keeping too close an eye on it, but I see Carrie and Paul have been doing some great responses. Cool. Okay, and that was actually really quick. So we have our container app. So if we go to the site, we have a web app. And actually, if you guys want, I don't entirely know how much it'll handle it, but if Molly, you want to add the link to my app that folks can visit, because this is a proper web app. This is online. Anybody can access it with this blah 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 URL. I can do words. And this is my personal one. Everybody's going to have their own, so everybody will have their own little unique thing. Oh, thanks, Josh, for posting it in the comments. Cool. Now this is a really simple app. There's not much on it. It's just a little bit of content. Why don't we explore it?
I won't disclose how long it took me to format it though with CSS. It took me longer than I'd like to admit.
It always takes longer. It always takes so long to make really simple items. So let's refresh my resource group, and there we have my container app. So if I click on my container app, we have it all up here. We have the application URL, we have what environment it's in, what resource group and location it's at. There's like our monitoring. So if we see that it hasn't existed at all and now it's getting used, there's an activity log of the fact that it started up. If I go to containers, this is the details about the container and where it's getting the container info. We don't have any environment variables or health probes or volume mounts set up, but it's our nice little thing. Currently, I think it's just got the default scale rules. So it has the minimum 0 scale. So it can have 0 to 10 replicas right now. Currently, it looks like there is 1 replica that's running. And if a lot of people visit it, then it will scale out more replicas at a max to 10 right now. And
so
this,
sorry, just a
go
quick
ahead.
question. So out of the box, this has the ability, it has a load balancer and has the ability to scale with that. So I didn't have to worry about setting up a load balancer and putting anything behind it and adding rules. That's kind of all there. And I just set one of the probes to be, or the scaling rule, not probe, sorry, to be whatever it is, to 10. And then obviously the number of instances are running are going to increase the bill, but that is kind of the default there that I can tinker with if I want to scale horizontally.
Yeah. And what I just did, actually, let me do that again while I'm talking. If I want to say change the scale rule, so right now it can scale to 0. Folks do sometimes want to do this, that if your app doesn't have anyone showing up and you want to save money, you can scale it to 0 and have nothing happen until somebody tries to go to the link, and then it will deploy a new replica. Replica. But let's say I'm nervous and always want to have just 1 replica running at any given time. I can edit and deploy my scale and just move it up. So let's say I want 3 replicas at minimum, and I don't mind if there's 27 replicas. We can also add scale rules. So this is where the stuff was about like scale rule of HTTP. So let's say that for every 2 concurrent HTTP requests, it scales. We can add that, and then I have a little scale rule on top of the default one. Or there's, if I do like a custom one, I can then use Kata to add all sorts of different scale rules. So one of them is like cron, where you can set up like, if I want to have this automatically scale up a lot during weekdays, during office hours, and have it just go back to reasonable scale on the weekends. Then I could set up like this. Or if you have stuff like events or queues, depending on your setup, you can do custom stuff like that. You can learn more with the Kata documentation. This is a little bit of side tangent, but. And then there are scalars, and there's all of these different scalars that you can set up. I think, wait, I might not be, I'm on the old version. I don't know why it always does that for me. So like I was saying with cron, there's these triggers of, you can have time zone and start and end date, and that sort of thing. But yeah, we have our little app. I'm not gonna set up a cron role actually.
There's a quick question from the chat, which was, is the TLS configured, or the TLS cert configured by default when deploying the container app?
That's a great question. So if when we were saying to add the scale rules, there's a type, I guess it's custom and then TLS. It isn't set up automatically, but it is pretty simple. And I think it's a TLS one right here. Carrie, correct me if I'm wrong. I haven't done too much with TLS.
Well, I don't know if they're talking about scaling or if just to start on the website.
I think this is more of just in terms of like ingress and networking. Is that correct, Eduardo? So
if that's the case, it's when you create it, you define.
Yeah. So for like TLS certification, Sophia, if you want to actually go to ingress.
There we go.
Yeah. So I'm going to have to double check to be exactly sure. So don't quote me on this one. I know it's recorded. So for TLS certifications, I do think if you're using HTTP, HTTPS, I do think we provide a managed cert that you can use. You can also bring your own certificate if you would like. But yeah, I do think that we have like managed certificate that you can bring and use by default. If you want to bring your own, that works as well. But I need to double check just to make sure that I'm giving the right details here, because don't want to give you any wrong information. But
all the ones I've deployed but if you just deploy it normally, it does do the HTTPS for you, and you have to go out of your way to say don't provision that for me.
Yeah.
So I know that we are getting close to the end of the time. Time flies. So really quick, I just want to talk through some of the other stuff that you can do. Within this little app, there is instructions to add a secret. This is about, here, this is adding a little thing where you can add your personal name onto the site, and then it shows up here like it will say Sophia deployment successfully. I think that we are out of time, so I'm not going to go through that, but it's future stuff that you can do. And feel free to play around with your app, see what you can do, see how you can edit it. But yeah, I think we are at time. I want to say thank you to everybody. and really appreciate doing this.
Well, it ended on a really good spot because people following along, they can go and complete that last step, which is just adding a secret that can be shared between the containers, and that'll set up an environment variable that then can configure the application. And so that's one way that you can store some kind of a state across the different containers. So yeah, it's a great place to start because everything's out there, and now you can just configure it. But thank you both so much for agreeing to come on and do this. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you so much. And excited to see the next 2 weeks as well for a 3-part series.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. All righty.